Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Yeah. So Georgia is leading the project called iCub, and which became the foundation of the European project called RobotCub. And he will tell us more about that. Please.
Okay. Yeah, I have a microphone. So, hi everybody. Thanks for being here. As Zhang Yu was saying, I'm from Genoa in Italy, from this new institute called Italian Institute of Technology. It's very new. Was started only 3 years ago by the Italian government to try to promote research and also try to foster some more strict collaboration with researchers with industry. Although what I'm going to show today is pretty much on the research side. We're also from a department that is called Robotics, Brain, and Cognitive Science, which so includes these three keywords are all represented in the department. We have neurophysiologists and people doing psychophysics, and we're sitting next to each other, so there are a lot of cross-disciplinary projects here. And in particular, I'm going to talk about, let's say, my favorite or our flagship project that is called RobotCub. This is funded by the European Union. In the European Union, there's a section that works on cognitive systems, and they fund projects, and they've been investing quite a lot recently, like $500 million in the last 5 years. So quite noticeable investment in that direction. This is the place in the mountains next to Genoa in Italy. And yeah, that's it for telling about where I come from. Tell you now about my background. So our main focus it's on the implementation of biologically sound models of cognition. By this I mean trying to learn from biology, transfer into models, and eventually implement them into real robots. So we're trying to collaborate. For the first part, we're trying to collaborate with the neurophysiology and psychophysics people. I'm sort of heading a group of people that have been working on developing robots and implementing these models into the robots. And with the eventual goal of building robot controllers that can learn and adapt, being more flexible, things that you eventually might not need to program explicitly, but you can just demonstrate tasks. Of course, this long-term goal take a while to get there. And we like to do this by, as I say, by sort of reverse engineering, go and look at the biological systems, at the brain, and get information for that. Building models, this can be in the form of mathematical or control theory models. And eventually put all these in a full functioning robot. And it's quite a long way to get there, but we have pieces and bits that we now ready sort of to put together. So I'll show today a few experiments that are not on the robot but are on separate sets of data, and this sort of illustrates the model we're thinking about. And I'll show you also something that is being done on the robot and what we mean by a robot. It's a full humanoid. And again, these two things will eventually converge, but I'm not there yet. The kernel of the problem for us, or what we're trying to understand about the brain, is whether we can mimic the brain by just plain programming, that will be the picture on the left, or rather we need to grow a brain by implementing suitable learning mechanisms into a robot and let the robot interact with the environment. I guess we're more on the second, on the right side of this, although there's quite a lot of programming still in what we do and robot we're building. A guiding philosophy in this aspect is that cognition cannot probably be hand-coded into the robot. It has to be the product of a process of development. And there's a particular view on cognition that makes it almost identical to prediction. So, and I'll show a few examples coming from biological sciences that show these aspects at work. This is a little video that actually shows prediction in very young infants. This is a 6-month-old infant reaching for a little toy. So the toy is moving, constant velocity, and you see it nicely goes and grasps it. And you see now a different situation. The toy stops, and let me see if I can show it this again. So reaching is perfect at this age, but if you suddenly stop the movement, the reaching where the hand goes, where to the predicted position of the object if it had not stopped. And this basically shows that since the almost very beginning, you have a prediction component, a predictive component in place, and that's required for interacting with the environment. You cannot live without that. And I mean, this has been pioneered, and there's a lot of research by this person, Klaas van Osten, which is, who is part of our project, RobotCub. There are other experiments that show similar things. This one that I like, just because the setup is so weird, is basically a rotating room, and they sit a person inside the rotating room, and then they try reaching. And of course, since the room is rotating, there are Coriolis forces, and the trajectory is deviated from the straight path. So you see here in the plot, like the solid line there is the pre-rotation. That means the room is stationary at that point. And if you ask to reach, you do a perfect straight path reach. That's typical of human reach. They go along a straight path. Now, as the room starts rotating, you see a deviation from the trajectory. But nicely, if you wait it long enough, and the long enough is not so long, it's only 30, 40 trials, the brain adapts and goes back to the straight trajectories. So the brain really loves straight trajectories. Now, if you stop the room, you see an after effect. So the error goes on the other way. Now, the point here is that there are two strategies to compensate for disturbances. One is stiffening your muscles, and you can actually do it. So one possibility here is that you were actually stiffening your muscles, and this means that you co-contract, so your flexor and extensors are both contracted, and you do the trajectory, and if there's a disturbance, you stiff, so you remain on track. And this could be a valid strategy. If not, for the after effect that you see there, which means that in practice, you're not co-contracting, you're just modeling the disturbances. Again, you have a model, and you're building a model on the fly. The brain is doing that all the time, and you're using this model to compensate the disturbances. And it's the same in other situations. There's another experiment where this person is moving an object on a given trajectory, and they've been measuring the grip force, and they were calculating the load force. The load force will be due to gravity. The grip force, they can put sensors and measure how much force has been exerted by the hand. And the nice point here on this experiment is that load force and grip force are exactly synchronous. As soon as you move from this configuration to this configuration, you increase your grip force. And the fact that they're synchronous tells us something about the brain, and that in fact the brain is building a model again. It's not just waiting for slippage to occur to measure it and then to increase the grip force. That's not the case, because if the brain were doing that, many objects will fall from your hands. What you see here, the two things are synchronous, which means that there's prediction. The brain takes time, so sensor information takes time to go from the tactile sensors to the brain and back. I mean, fastest spinal reflex are in the order of 30 to 50 milliseconds. So you don't see the milliseconds there, which means there's no delay, which means the brain is actually predicting what the load forces will be and generating them compensation in advance.
Is that based on prior slippage from previous tasks? Has an estimate of
I mean, this is an adult person, so he knows how to move an object from one place to another. So not for that particular object, but there's one thing about human touch is that as soon as you touch an object, you can estimate the friction. Just the deformation on your fingertips is enough to start estimating friction. So you basically know how much force to apply. So this is the first part of our view on cognition, saying that the brain has to build models and use these models to behave effectively. Another thing that is important to know about these models is that there's quite a lot of motor information involved in these models. They're not only or purely perceptual. And this is all strain of research that goes back to the work of Rizzolatti. This is a neurophysiologist, and was working for quite some time on the monkey mostly, but also on humans. And the reason I show in this sketch the brain is to show that to a couple of things. First of all, that these people have been analyzing a region called F5. That is this one here. This is called the premotor cortex, and the reason. I mean, I'll tell you a bit more about the responses of these neurons they found, and to know why this is a bit surprising. So the people. These guys in particular started looking at neurons in that area, and they started finding things like these. These are grasping neurons. What you see here are a single neuron recording. So they basically put an electrode close enough to a neuron. They start seeing action potentials. Each dot in those diagrams is an action potential. They record multiple experiments. They synchronize them, and what you see down there is the histogram, the cumulative histogram of the activation of the neuron. Now, the point here is the following. This is a premotor area, and F5 is specifically connected to manipulation. And they're starting seeing things like these. So there's, for instance, they recorded a particular neuron here, unit 108-3, and the monkey was reaching and grasping an object. What you see here is that doesn't matter what hand is being used, the neuron will still fire, which means that it's not coding for the movement per se, it's coding for more abstract action. So it doesn't matter which muscles are eventually getting activated. This is a neuron that encodes grasping, and also encodes grasping of a particular type. So in this particular case, it encodes grasping, a precision grip grasping with 2 fingers, but doesn't encode something like a full palm cylindrical grasp type. So it seems, and they found hundreds of these neurons, and it seems that this area 5 has a sort of a vocabulary of actions. They're very abstract in the sense that some of them fire whether the monkey uses the left hand, the right hand, or the mouth. So that's also a grasping, a valid grasping. So if the monkey just puts something in the mouth, the same neuron will be activated, as if grasping as a concept has been abstracted at this level. Okay, this is a purely motor response, but they started finding other things, and this was more surprising. So this happened 20 years ago, and maybe around that, maybe 25, but around that time, there was this idea of the brain as, okay, here in the occipital lobe, you have vision, then there's something in between, some coordinate conversion system, more here frontal, you have the motor cortex. That's where you control your muscles, and that's it. I mean, vision here, motor control there, and something in between that connects and transforms the data. But then they started looking at these neurons again in F5, and they found surprisingly, they found visual responses. And this is a particular neuron that responds when the monkey, for instance, is reaching for an object, like a ring, or when it's also just watching the object, which is what you see there. So it's like as soon as the monkey sees the object, this neuron gets activated. If the monkey decides to reach for the object, same neuron will continue to fire. So it's sort of representing some feature of that object that is required for grasping it. And if you change the object, the response changes as well. So a cylinder will activate this object, this neuron, but maybe if you take another neuron, a cylinder will be the best stimulus for that particular neuron. So this to say that the view of the brain of 25 years ago was a bit wrong. So there's no this vision part, motor part, but the brain is sort of mixing up signals all the way from vision to motor control. So it's all a big interconnected network, and it's difficult to disentangle specific visual responsive neurons with respect to motor control. And these guys are very famous for finding this other class of neurons also in this area F5, which are called mirror neurons, and you may have heard of them. What happened here is that they found that some of these neurons will respond in two situations. One where the monkey is just reaching, grasping an object, but also same neuron, same unit, when the experimenter, a person, is reaching and grasping the same object. And these neurons are very selective, so they've been doing a lot of things, like using tools to grasp the object instead of the hand, and the neuron will stay silent. Or they tried hiding the object behind the screen, so showing the monkey the object, putting a screen in between, and then reaching behind the screen, and the neuron will fire in prediction of the type of grasp that will be appropriate for that object. This is just to tell that this is not merely the interpretation of visual information, it's also a model or a prediction of what the monkey will expect of that particular action in that particular situation. And they went forward, they found other neurons again, mirror neurons in a different area. And this is interesting because here, even the motor act doesn't change, though because of the context, the neuron may change the response. And I'll tell you the experiment here. What was happening was that there were two situations, basically. The monkey was given a piece of food, could either put on a tray that was sitting on the table, as shown there, or eat it. So if the tray was visible, the food would have to go on the tray. If the tray wasn't visible, the monkey was free to eat the food. And they found neurons that respond in this situation. The striking part of these is that the moment the monkey starts reaching, the neurons start firing. And but the point is that there's no clue that, I mean, the tray is there, so you can think that's the clue, but the action itself is still the same. The motor information connected to that action doesn't code for the different situations. What happens here is that, of course, the presence of different objects may bias the firing of these neurons towards one possibility or the other. It's like this neuron is sort of coding some more intentional level of the monkey, in the sense that all this other visual information is taken into account to decide what action has to be taken. And this is true also if the monkey is just observing a person doing the same type of actions. And again, from the kinematics of the first reach, you cannot tell the difference. So this is just to show that it's a bit more complicated than just purely looking at motor information. So I moved to a slightly different experiment, but just to show that this idea of manipulating things connects to more high-level functions in the brain, and in particular, this area F5, by the way, is what is known in the human brain as Broca's area. And Broca's area is connected to speech. People that have damage in that area cannot speak well. They lose the ability to speak. although depending on the damage, you get different effects. Broca's is more on the production phonological level, so they start lacking the ability to properly articulate words. A group, again, Rizzolatti, a group of other people started doing experiments in this direction with speech, and in particular, with speech, we have to do that with people, and the technique they use is called TMS, that stands for transcranial magnetic stimulation. Just place a coil close to the brain. The zap produces a strong magnetic field that disturbs the brain, induces a current that makes all the neurons in a small region to fire, which means effectively that area is not able to do anything coherently for 100 milliseconds. You can then do various things. A particular experiments these guys have been doing was to sit a person on a chair, present a set of words by speaking them, measure the response in the tongue muscle, and do the TMS at the same time. The response in the tongue muscle is basically showing whether there's a connection between listening to the words, the stimulation, and the activation of the tongue muscles. Typically, it seems like when you listen to words, your muscles are pre-activated to say the same things you're listening to. Although without the TMS, you don't see the effect. I mean, there's inhibition somewhere that blocks the movement of your tongue. With the TMS, you basically see this effect, and you can measure it. So the words they presented were Italian words, because these people are from Italy. And in particular, there were two classes, words and pseudo-words, and also the phonemes involved were different. So there's one case where there's a double R, and that sounds a bit like birra, the first word there. So we're a rolling R, which is beer, and you see all the other words there. The pseudo-words are perfectly pronounceable in Italian, but they don't have any meaning. The same thing for the double F. Now the two phonemes show basically have a different involvement in the tongue movement. So double F, you don't need to move the tongue much. Conversely, you have to move the tongue for doing the double R. And this is the result, which is basically that you're listening to words again, TMS, the double R. You see a different involvement due to the TMS when you do the double R versus double F, which means that you basically listening to these words, and you see, and since you're measuring on the tongue muscle only, when you listen to the double F, there's no activation of the tongue muscle because that's not required for pronouncing double F. When you listen to the double R, there's a disactivation that you reveal through the TMS because you will move the tongue to say a double R. And for the pseudo words, there's a different significant effect. So it's not only the phoneme that counts, but it's also the meaning of the word, apparently, from this experiment. And there was a control made of just sounds that sort of mimic the prosody of the word, but they don't have any phonetic content. And you see that has, again, a different significant response in that case. So this is to say that your motor cortex is sort of involved also in your speech perception. And I mean, this is again is sort of a new result from neurophysiology. Although there were people saying similar things in the past, the first evidence that this is the case has been revealed only and demonstrated recently. This for the neurophysiology part. Then what we said, well, let's try to do something similar. If we had a computer that can access motor information, can we do any better in recognizing actions? This again goes back one-to-one to this idea of the mirror neurons that we saw in the case of the neurophysiology. So what we've done, this is an experiment for a few years back. What we've done here was to record human reaching actions and build a machine that can use motor information only during training, trying to build a better classifier and recognize these human actions. And the machine was this one, was a cyber glove, a couple of cameras, tactile sensors for telling when we were touching the object, magnetic tracker placed on the hand to measure the reaching movement. And what we done was to frame this recognition in a Bayesian framework where we had a set of gestures that was our grass types that we wanted to recognize, set of observed features, and I'll be going back to those later, and a set of objects. We can basically build priors in terms of the probability that you apply a certain gesture given that you see a certain object, and this goes back to the canonical neurons I showed earlier. That is, you see the object, you recognize the object, you know what likely or what grasping actions you can apply. And we recorded the same reaching from various viewpoints, and this was to test also viewpoint invariant in the recognition system. What else? Yeah, the features. Now, the problem for building the classifier is, of course, finding features from these images of the reaching actions. We tried two things, basically. One was go straight and use vision and try to build a classifier on vision. And we didn't want to put much, let's say, priors on the features we were selecting, so we used PCA. We basically segmented the hand, normalized, and did PCA on the resulting images, and then kept certain numbers of principal components. And the other version of these is the following. We take vision, we do the same visual extraction, but then we do a pre-processing before doing the classification. This processing was done by standard neural network in that case. This pre-processing takes into account motor information. So that's available while training. So what we've done was to use the FV there and the FM to build the mapping from what you're seeing to the joint angles that were recorded with the data glove. And then we built the classifier in this case. Let me skip this. So this is the type of images we collected. There were hundreds of these sequences, and there were roughly 35 frames in each sequence prior to the grasping of the object. And as I said, we knew just by counting which was the most likely action given a certain object, use that as a prior. We built the mapping using this neural network, and then we did the classification. And what is important to see here is that look at the last two columns, experiment 3 and 4. That's exactly visual experiment where only visual features are used, and motor experiment where also motor information is taken into account. Now, what happens is that as you train the system, no problem, you do 97, 98% in recognition on the training set, of course. As you go to testing, what happens is that if you have visual features alone, apparently the classifier does a much harder life in trying to generalize. So recognition rate goes down to 80%, while in the case where motor information was taken into account during training, it seems to generalize better and performance stays fairly high. So seems there's something to be gained by doing this pre-processing and using that into the recognition. I saw later a paper by Hinton that was doing something similar for the character recognition. So using a model on how the person will actually write the characters into the recognition, so effectively taking into account motor information. And I saw also recently a couple of people doing similar things in speech, that is pre-processing data with neural networks, trying to get features that work better for the classification case. And I'll get to that. Some additional neurophysiology first. This is a very recent experiment, 2009, again by the group of Fadiga, who was one of the students of Rizzolatti. These people have been, again, doing TMS, and this, I think, is a very important paper. Maybe, will be recognized to be important, I guess, in the future, because it's the first paper showing direct causal link between stimulation in the motor cortex and perception of a given phoneme. So the situation was similar to the one I described before, person sitting and listening, but now the stimulation site was different, was in the primary motor cortex. And what they've done was basically to go and look for, so there's in the primary motor cortex you find the somatotopy, which means that there are regions that control a particular effector. So they went and found the region that controls the tongue and the region that controls the lips. And then they presented people with phonemes embedded in noise. These phonemes are phonemes that are either labial, that require the movement of the lips, or dental, that require the movement of the tongue. Okay, so there are things like BMP or TND. Okay, and what they done was to basically stimulate, let's say, the tongue part, while presenting either labial phonemes or dental phonemes, and vice versa, stimulated in the lips part, while presenting either labial or dental phonemes. And the fact that you have noise makes everything very difficult. Otherwise, it would be impossible to see the effect, because in normal conditions, you perceive very well, and so this doesn't show up. Anyway, the results are the following. These are two measures, two different measures of performances. Doesn't matter which one you choose. Let's consider the one on top is reaction times. So you have to tell which phonemes is being presented while the TMS is delivered. And what happens is that the performance increases in the case the tongue part of the cortex is stimulated and the phoneme is the dental one. Increase. So reaction time is lower. In the case you have a dental phoneme and the stimulation is in the tongue part, and vice versa. If you stimulate the lips region, the performance goes worse. So, and this happens exactly the opposite if you're presented with the labial phoneme and you stimulate either the tongue part or the lips part. This double dissociation means that if you stimulate a particular region, the tongue region, let's say, you effectively disturbing or improving the recognition of phoneme that requires the movement of the tongue. So it means that perception requires your motor cortex one way or another. Perception of speech requires your motor cortex. That is kind of, again, surprising, at least to the traditional view that you just, for recognizing speech, you just sit there, get the information, and do the audio processing, and that's it. So we tried to do the same on a machine, and this time it's a bit trickier than recording grasping, because you have to record the movement of whatever, the tongue, your lips, everything that is connected to speech. But we basically replicated the same experiment. We took speech of a certain number of phonemes, B, P, D, T, exactly the ones that are being used for the TMS experiment. And we tried to collect motor information about these phonemes, and I'll show you how we done this with this nice machine. That is a magnetic tracker. So we place coils in the tongue of certain number of lucky subjects, and also recorded the face with a camera. We had a few. They're wearing glasses. The glasses are for calibration. And we also have an ultrasound machine placed here, just to make it more convenient to, beside the coils on the tongue, they have to stay like this, unfortunately. And the ultrasound is imaging the back part of the tongue. We also have a video face, and also the it's called laryngography of vocal folds. It's another machine that you place just here and records the activation of the vocal folds. So we took this data from 9 speakers and a set of 74 words and syllables, and I don't remember how many repetitions. So it's few. For each phoneme, I think we have less than 1,000 repetitions, definitely. So it's not a big training set. Definitely much smaller than what you use for training HMMs. And then we tried sort of base experiment that is the following. We take audio features and we take motor features. And motor features here for us are movement of the tongue, and in particular, we took the distance between the lips that is, of course, connected with the movement of your lips, and they're especially active when pronouncing labial phonemes. And we took also the distance of the tongue from the teeth, which is again also an indication or a measurement of the activation of the tongue while pronouncing things like T and D. What you see here is a different set of experiments with different type of cross validations. What is nice to see is basically the following. So here we took data from 5 people and tested on another person that was never heard before. So and you see, if you use only audio features, you do nicely. If you do also use motor information, you do better. If you combine the two, you do even better. So it seems that motor information has something to give. Of course, this is the original motor information, so it's not surprising that if you add more information, then you do better in classification. But also we want to test things like these where there's only one person used for training and 5 people for in recognition, in cross-validation. What I like of these is this is exactly a situation of a person while learning to speak, because it's listening to other people, but it can only have motor information of its own movement, not of the other people's movements. So, and if again, combination of audio and motor does a better job. And then we wanted to try something that is very difficult for the machine, that is co-articulation. Co-articulation is the phenomenon by which you, because of the following vowel, you change the way you pronounce the consonant that comes earlier. And this, again, is a disaster, almost to chance level for the audio features alone, and works nicely for motor information. The combination of the two is worse. It doesn't improve because I guess this is almost the chance level, and there's no weight. I mean, this is not a weighted average. It's just a combination of the two. We should probably have to look at the reliability of the signals before combining them. Of course, this confusing the machine in a sense. Now, what were these data? So the audio features were sort of standard Melbank spectrogram of speech for a period of 210 milliseconds. Gives a feature vector of 200 dimensions. And the output space is point-by-point trajectories of the tongue and the lips. And these are these two functions. Velocity of the lips, VLI, acceleration of the lips, ALI, and the velocity and acceleration of the tongue, tongue tip. So this is the motor information we're using together with the activation of the vocal folds. That's a binary signal, 0, 1, basically. And we use support vector for regression, Gaussian kernel, cross-validation, grid search to optimize the parameters. And as I say, the cross-validation was done either over all utterances or per speaker. And the per speaker can be done in various ways. These are some of the results of the regression. So the blue lines are the original data, and the red line is the approximation by the support vector machine. Given the fact that starting from space that is 200-dimensional, is doing, I think, quite a good job in building an approximation. There are glitches here and there. We evaluated the quality of this approximation by looking at basically at the cross-correlation of these two signals. And what you see is that when you try to approximate lips movements and the phoneme that is being pronounced as a dental phoneme, you don't do a good job, which is, again, for our neurophysiology colleagues, seems to be for granted, but for us, I think was a nice result showing that there are motor outputs you don't control when you have to, so if you're pronouncing something that requires the activation of the tongue, you have less control on the movement of the lips and vice versa. So you control only the degrees of freedom that are required for achieving the goal, and the others are redundant and they kind of lose. And in fact, they're not approximated well. When we look at the data, they're more difficult to approximate because there's a lot of variability just by the fact that they're not controlled that much. Okay, this is the similar experiment. Now, so what we have so far, we approximated we've taken the audio signals and mapped into the motor information, and now we try to do the recognition using this motor information and see whether we have an improvement by the combination of audio and motor information. Now, the motor information the real one has been thrown away, and this is just reconstructed from the audio information. There's no magic here. The only thing is that motor information is helping finding features that are good for classification. This is the underlying idea. And what happens here is that, again, as before, so this is the earlier plot. Of course, with the approximation there are, the overall performance goes down a bit, but still you see that there are advantages, and these advantages are particularly good when in situations where things are getting difficult. So like here, and especially in the co-articulation case, this is much better than the chance level that we're getting here, almost chance level. So, yep.
So here, the input is only just audio signals?
Yep. The motor is only reconstructed.
Okay, basically you just have a different feature.
Yeah, exactly. It's only in the feature, in fact. Yeah. We now going ahead with this experiment is not entirely finished. We started looking at the performance of the audio feature and see when having motor information is really advantageous. I have to tell the entire truth about this. We tried HMM on this data, and they do very good. They do a very nice job in recognizing these phonemes, but that's not the point. For us, what we're looking at is situations where there are difficulties for the HMMs. We like to have like this additional thing that sits next to the HMM maybe, and detects when there are situations where things can be improved. And these situations may be when there's noise. This is audio features and performance and classification as you add noise to the utterances, and you see that it's easy to get to go down quickly as you add noise. Like 15% of the overall utterance standard deviation of noise will give you already a drop from 95 to 70% in recognition. So what we're doing here, so it's working with the same data we had before, but now in the noisy situation. And in the noisy situation, you still, what you see that is very nice is that in the co-articulation case, you get a very nice performance of the motor features, while the audio drops dramatically, almost to chance level. So it seems that these features are really effective in difficult situations where you may have noise and other disturbances, between quotes, like the co-articulation case. Okay, I think this is it for the type of work we're trying to do. Just wanted to show you that these goes into this idea of doing robotics. And so in the last part of my presentation, I get into the details of the robot. Oh, by the way, this guy is Galileo Galilei, was Italian that went all the way to build a telescope because he wanted to do science. We also want to do science, and our telescope in this case is this one. That is a humanoid robot, and this is the one we developed as part of our project. So this was developed from scratch. It's all custom made. Was also built in multiple copies, and I'll show you some of these things. Since we were interested in the manipulation, we made hands. So differently from many of the Japanese humanoid robots, we have dexterous hands. We spent a lot of time adding degrees of freedom to these hands for doing things like fine manipulation, dexterity. And we also have a moving head, moving eyes, and this is again something that you don't find quite often in the typical off-the-shelf robots, assuming you can buy off-the-shelf robots at this point. What else? So this is the quick summary of the features of the robot. It's full humanoid robot. The size of roughly a 3.5-year-old child. So it's 1 meter tall, 53 degrees of freedom. So there are 53 motors inside. And as I say, it is designed for manipulation. It should be also able to crawl on all fours and sit, and potentially, if somebody writes the software, also crawl, then sit, and manipulate objects, crawl again, fetch an object, and so forth. And the robot is open source, the entire thing, including the hardware. And hardware drawings, documentation, etc. This is just a video showing the movement of the fingers. You see, you can move the thumb independently. There are 3 degrees of freedom in the thumb, so it can rotate. You can move the proximal joint, but also the distal ones independently. The same for first 2 fingers, and the last 2 fingers are simplified. They are only a single degree of freedom used for supporting, grasping. It can potentially also walk on 2 legs, so it's fast and strong enough for walking, but we don't have the software, so there's a lot to be done in that direction. It has absolute position encoders, cameras, standard VGA resolution, 30 frames per second. It has microphones, 2 microphones, and also we designed the pinna to help sound localization. So we have a slight asymmetry, but also the shape of the outer ear is made in such a way that changes the frequency response as a function of elevation of the sound, something that is very human-like. We have gyroscopes and linear accelerometers, so they're mounted on the head. They can be used for balance, but also for stabilizing the images as the robot moves. As I said, we designed the entire platform, so all the mechanics, but also the electronics. So it's made on C programmable little DSP boards. They can communicate via via canvas. And we also designed a bunch of other electronics boards that are required for reading the sensors and sending them to central unit, which is a Pentium that is mounted on the head. Of course, this is not enough for computation. It's standard dual core. But we have a gigabit Ethernet that goes outside, and we have a cluster sitting next room for computation, for the real thing. So the robot is not fully autonomous. It's tethered, both for computation but also for power. And I mean, by the way, the reason for building these boards is that we needed to fit them to the size of the robot. So we took particular care in making them exactly fit the shape of the robot. We couldn't find anything off the shelf in this case, given the power and all these constraints. We also designed face. This was designed later after the initial sketch of the mechanic. And at that point, we're kind of sick of the degree of freedom. There were already too many, so went for LEDs for animating the eyebrows and mouth. So a very simple solution. So there's an array of LEDs, and there's a spreader that makes them look like eyebrows, and you can move them to different configurations. And this is like the outer shell of the robot, and this is like what it looks like when it's finished. As I say, there's no software for balancing, so the robot's being held in place by a stand. And by the way, since the project, as I say, was open source, I mean, it's easy to say, to just stick a label and say it's open source, but since the European Commission here wanted to take some additional actions, so they say, well, build many and give to others. And that's what we've done. So at the end of the project, we'll have 18 working platforms. The end of the project is spring. Well, it's January. The robots will be probably all finished by spring next year. 13 of them are already built and have been given to different research institutes across Europe. So like 4 of them under construction, like one is finished, 2 more under testing, and there are bits and bits on the tables there. This is not quite there, but as I said, in terms of making this really used by other people, this is a list of, we launched an open call and asked people to propose what they'd like to do with these robots, and then we awarded 7 of them to these institutes in Paris, London, Lyon, Munich, Ankara, Barcelona. There's one in the States, Urbana-Champaign, in Lisbon, and we have one in EPFL in Lausanne. And then, I guess because people like this whole idea of sharing a platform, there are more European projects that are asking for these robots. We built 4 for another project called iTalk, where they're looking at grounding language via interaction. And to another one that is called I'm Clever, we're going to build 3 robots now. We're starting now, basically, for that set. There's another project that is looking at the skin, and I'll show you some results in that direction. And we have also just kind of random, in a sense, collaboration. So like with the University of Karlsruhe, we developed a set of legs that is a bit longer than ours, because they wanted to investigate manipulation with a robot that is able to reach a table. Our robot is a bit too short for that. So they have a more natural sort of adult size environment. And we also have a simulator, very simple one. It's meant to help people understand the software more than simulating the real physics of the robot. This is about the skin. This is a new project that will make a skin for the entire body. All the plastic you see on top of the robot will be covered with these sensors. It's very easy in a sense, because it's made out of tactile capacitive sensors. These are using, like here, you typically have a microchip that does all the job, converts capacitance into digital values. And our goal was basically to build deformable capacitors. So what we've done, we placed electrodes on one side, a silicon layer, and then a conductive layer on top. So this is exactly like the iPod slider, if you think of it. It's nothing different in terms of technology. The shape is different, and also the outer layer requires some thinking, because it has to protect the sensors, and also it has certain durability issues, because it gets in touch with the environment all the time. And this is how it looks like once will be installed in the robot. This is just a test of the actual production. This is the palm, again, showing that you can fit some of these triangles. Showing also another nice thing. You can cut pretty much, if you don't cut the chip, you can cut all the sides and the parts of the sensors, and that's not a problem. Because the way the routing the wires is done, if you don't touch anything vital like the power supply, you can cut out some of the sensors, which is like here, we needed to remove one. Let me see if okay. Needed to remove one, and we just cut it out because it was, we needed to fit to the shape of the palm of the hand. We did a similar thing for the fingertips. Here the technology was a bit trickier because of the size. The overall size you see there is 14 by 13 millimeters in size. And basically painted the electrodes on one side and a plastic support, made a silicone mold that makes the outer layer of the fingertip, which is what you see here, and then covered. At this point, covering was quite tough because we needed to get some conductive material that was also stretchable and moldable to this to the curvature of the fingertip, and we made into conductive silicone. Wasn't difficult after we contacted a material person. They could actually take carbon black and embed carbon black into a silicone and basically melt it and deposit on top of the fingertips. So. And this gives, it's compatible with the hands of the robot and gives 12 sensing points in the fingertips. So this is additional information for the robot during manipulation. Let me skip this one. What we done, we also started adding force sensors to the robot. So all the videos you saw already were without force sensors. So the robot is very stiff, and if it encounters an obstacle, it tries to destroy it if it can, or destroys itself. So it's not very good. We added now to the upper part of the body. So this is under development, so it'll take a while before it gets into the robot. But we're basically changing some of the parts, sensorizing them using strain gauges, and measuring torques at the joint level. And then you can build compliance into the system by actively controlling the torques. And we've done this in two ways, by modifying certain parts, but also by adding a 6-axis force torque sensor here in the upper part of the arm. So when you touch things now, you be able to sense forces and interact properly. This is a video showing this joint level torque control for one of the arms. You see initially position control mode, which is stiff. So as you grab the robot by the wrist, you see that it is all very stiff. It's very difficult to move, actually. The motors are very powerful. But you can, on the fly, change to low impedance control mode. This is just zero gravity, basically, so the robot will stay there. And I hope it gives the impression, because it's something you really have to feel rather than to see on video in this case. But I think it works nicely, and this gives the possibility of full force interaction with the robot. Together with the skin, the two things complement each other. Should be able to interact also more safely with people. And last but not least, we also develop our own software infrastructure for the robot for managing the cluster. This is a bit like what it looks like internally, both in hardware and software. You have a set of DSPs with a low-level controller. There's PC104 Pentium inside the head. There's gigabit Ethernet and a cluster outside. And we have our plumbing that has a particular name called YARP, and where that it sort of facilitates building the high-level cognitive architecture by sending information here and there.
Are you planning to reduce the cluster to like a hardware platform with FPGAs or ASICs or something?
Not.
More real time?
We don't have the plans, but certainly possible research direction. So far for us was much easier just to go for a cluster and concentrate on the algorithms. Actually, not even on the algorithms so far, on construction of the robot. And these are a set of videos showing experiments we ran with a bunch of people, with Peter Domini in Lyon. We're doing some robot interaction using speech. So here, the reaching and grasping is all pre-programmed, but the interaction with speech has been implemented for real. And what the robot does is helping the person in doing certain tasks, but also remembering sequences of actions. And after a while, so if you know of this speech interaction, it's a bit like these. You tell the robot to grasp, and the robot says, "Did you say grasp?" And and you continue like that. The robot asks for confirmation all the time because it's never guaranteed to have understood correctly. But if you embed this in a sequence where and the robot recognizes that from the initial part of the sequence that you're doing the same action again and again, then it preempts you and avoids or skips these all these asking for confirmation. But also at a certain point it says, "I know what to do," and starts doing the action itself because I mean it's always the same basically. So trying to go in that direction, and well, of course we need to improve the perceptual side at this point. On this other experiment, the robot is drumming and is using a set of neural oscillators to drive all the joints and synchronize them. And this has been done together with a group at EPFL. I mean, the drumming per se is not a task that we really wanted to get involved into, but it's there because the same controller can be reused for locomotion. So the idea, I have another video later that shows the robot crawling, and it's using the same controller there. But this is much safer than crawling, so for us it was a good test to start with the drumming thing. There you see, well, it's a video that I like because it was put together in 10 days at one of our summer schools. There were a group of students working on visual servoing, so detecting a ball, in that particular case using a particle filter, and doing inverse kinematics that is required to grasp the ball. And this one down here shows, it's nice, although the underlying system is just a plain attention system based on the ET and Koch model. So it's running vision, doing set of filtering and getting potentially interesting locations and then driving the eyes to look at the locations. It does a bunch of variants with respect to the original model. It's taking into account the fact that you're moving the head and the body, so it's not static as the one proposed by ET. Then I have two videos here showing, one there is showing crawling. It's the very first experiment on crawling. And you see, moves slowly, but the robot is, in fact, sustaining the entire weight of the body. I mean, there's no, the bars you see are for attaching it to the to safety little crane, but and there's no vision. It's fully open loop. So after a while, the robot gets astray and has to be lifted. And sorry. Is 24 kilograms. And what you see there is just some reaching behavior. This time it's a bit better than what has been done at the summer school, and just shows that the robot can track an object. The object is very simple again, so much vision there. And then can do the reaching. And it takes into account a bunch of, so it's interesting, per se, it's just inverse kinematics, but it's taking into account the fact that the arm is redundant. It has 7 degrees of freedom. So it gets nicely with dealing with the position of the elbow, and takes also into account joint limits, movements, and other things. So we use an optimization method that gives certain guarantees. And I think I'm done, apart from the conclusions. So what I've been talking about is particular view on cognition. That is what we trying to follow. There is internal models, and some of them deeply connected to the motor system, as it seems to be happening in the brain. may be advantages to copy this solution in artificial systems, and this is what we try to show with these two experiments, one on recognition of grasping, the other one on the recognition of phonemes. And in these artificial systems, eventually may require a body to generate sensory motor patterns autonomously and learning by interaction with the environment. And that's what we're trying to do with the robot, so giving the system a full-fledged body. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I saw a video of this robot trying to reach for something to take it out.
Yeah.
So the motion, so I guess you guys mostly are doing the inverse kinematics, so the motion looks kind of mechanical. I wonder if you have any plan. So I don't think. Okay. So typically when humans do things, because there are so many redundant degree of freedoms, so the humans accomplish this by, I think one hypothesis is to minimize the amount of energy it takes to accomplish a task. So the resulting motion tends to be more natural, graceful.
Yeah.
So I wonder for robots, we should be able to do the same thing, right? So instead of just doing inverse kinematics, they're also doing inverse dynamics to minimize the work done. So I think that the resulting motion should look much more natural.
Yeah, we have a few activities in that direction, but they're not sort of ready yet to be used on the robot. There's, in particular, we're using something that is called passive motion paradigm. Maybe the word doesn't tell you much, but basically it's a method that seems to be well in agreement with certain behaviors in human trajectory generation. We're looking at that as a way, I mean, it has certain biological plausibility, and we're looking at that as a way to generate motion in the robot, and also to use all the redundancy, like also move the body for reaching. I mean, this point it wasn't there yet, but that is going to happen at a certain point. So it's definitely, I mean, it's an important topic.
Other questions?
Throw a ball.
I was wondering, so all the research that you presented seems to be on the software layer as far as cognition goes. Are there any, is there any investigation going on that that goes into how hardware might change to model cognition?
We have a small group for now, people that's working on something called neuromorphic engineering. I don't know if you heard the word. It's basically simulating VLSI chips, the behavior of neurons. There's a particular way of using the transistors that are allowed to build very easily neurons that have behaviors, with spiking behaviors, and you can build networks of these neurons. And in particular, we're looking at building a sensor. So that there's been experiments already in building cameras that work very closely to the human retina. But for instance, they don't naturally provide intensity, but rather they provide changes in intensity, and which is what the retina does all the time. And also, we're looking at making the resolution of the sensor more closer to the human retina. A lot of pixels in the fovea, and then degrading resolution in the periphery. And this entails a different, so it's a different paradigm also in between quotes in computation, in the sense that you get these spikes, these events, and you have to process them. There's no frame rate, for instance. You get this information all the time. It's analog spikes. And so all the processing on these cameras has to be done differently. There's quite lively community working on that around the world, and they've been doing things like optic flow and stereo. So it seems that will go more in the direction of changing the hardware radically. And by the way, these chips are very power efficient, which may also count in the future if you want to increase or put a lot of them in the head of the robot for real.
Any more questions?
So I read an article about the software module called a perceptron, which tries to model a neuron, with the axon and the dendrites and all that stuff. And the idea is to have a whole bunch of those networking and to be able to learn without the need for a huge computational support system like the cluster you referred to. Is that something you're aware of? Are there any plans to use that in the future?
The point here is that the perceptron is very efficient from the point of view of the learning algorithm, because it's very simple and it's incremental, but it's not very good in. It depends on how you do that, but it's not typically very good in the performance. The machines we're using are not particularly time-consuming in the learning stage. What the cluster is used for is mostly for vision at this point. So it's all the visual processing that is taking a lot of computational power. And the learning, you can basically even think of using a single computer and just leave it there, processing the data for a couple of days, and then you have your learning stuff, and you just plug it back on the robot. I mean, it's not what we're doing, but it's theoretically possible. It's not necessarily the learning that is taking most of the time, depending on the size of the problem, of course.
Okay, let's thank Giorgio again. Thank you.